On the morning of my 29th birthday, exactly 3 weeks after my positive pregnancy test, I poured a full glass of milk down the kitchen sink without taking a single sip. It wasn't because I suddenly hated milk. It was because I had just watched my husband Daniel Pierce stir something into it when he thought I wasn't looking. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask a question. I simply walked over, picked up the glass, and emptied it like it meant absolutely nothing. If you've ever felt your entire world go silent in a single second, you know exactly what that moment felt like. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. If you saw someone you trusted more than anyone in the world secretly putting something into your drink, would you confront them immediately? Or would you stay quiet and watch? Because what I did next changed everything. And if you're someone who believes karma always finds its way back, make sure you subscribe and stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way you think it will. 3 months earlier, my life looked painfully ordinary. My name is Natalie Brooks. I was 29 years old, living in Chandler, Arizona, working as a dental receptionist, making $19 an hour. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Daniel Pierce, my husband of 4 years, worked as a warehouse shift supervisor. He made about $58,000 a year and constantly reminded me that he was the real provider in our household. That should have been my first red flag. But when you grow up like I did, in a family where love always came with conditions, you learn to accept small humiliations as normal. Daniel wasn't violent. He didn't scream. He didn't cheat, at least not in any way I could prove. What he did was something far more subtle. He slowly made me feel small. He controlled the finances, even though we both worked. My paycheck went into a joint account he managed. He always framed it as being responsible. I told myself that's just how marriages worked. Then I found out I was pregnant. The test cost $11.99 at Walgreens. I remember the exact price because I stared at the receipt for a long time after seeing those 2 pink lines. Daniel's reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't hug me. He didn't smile. He just went very, very quiet. Then he said something that still echoes in my head. This isn't a good time. Not we'll figure it out. Not I'm scared, but happy. Just, this isn't a good time. That was the second red flag. The third came 2 weeks later when my younger sister, Ashley Brooks, suddenly started visiting our apartment almost every day. Ashley was 24, unemployed, and always drifting between career ideas. She had that kind of beauty that made people forgive her for anything. Daniel always called her kiddo. He started driving her to job interviews, started helping her review resumes, started staying up late, talking with her at the kitchen table. At first, I felt grateful. Family helping family. That's what I told myself. But then, little things started stacking up. Ashley stopped making eye contact with me. Daniel started locking his phone. Conversations would stop the moment I entered the room. You know that feeling when a room suddenly goes quiet and you realize you're the reason. It's like stepping into invisible cold water. One night, I came home early from work with severe nausea, pregnancy, morning sickness that hit like a truck at random hours. I walked into the kitchen and saw them standing too close together. Not touching, but too close. Ashley jumped back like she'd been burned. Daniel laughed it off, saying they were just looking at her phone screen. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. But I didn't know how wrong. The real turning point came last week. I had gone to bed early because of exhaustion. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty and walked toward the kitchen. I stopped halfway down the hallway when I heard whispering. Ashley's voice. Are you sure it'll work? Daniel's voice, low and tense. The dosage is small. It won't hurt her. It'll just end it early. End it. At the time, my brain refused to process what I'd heard. I convinced myself I misunderstood. Because what kind of person even thinks their husband and sister would discuss something like that? So I said nothing. I kept pretending everything was normal. Until this morning, my birthday. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and Daniel acting unusually cheerful. Ashley was already at the apartment at 7 a.m. She never woke up that early. That alone should have told me everything. I walked into the kitchen and saw Daniel standing by the counter with his back to me, holding a small white packet. He poured milk into a glass. Then he emptied the packet into it. He stirred carefully, methodically, like he'd done it before. Ashley stood near this doorway, watching, not speaking, not smiling, just watching. That was when something inside me snapped into perfect clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't even breathe harder. I simply stepped forward so they'd know I was there. Daniel turned startled and forced a smile. "Happy birthday, Nat. I made you milk to help with the nausea." I took the glass. I looked directly into his eyes. Then I walked to the sink and poured it out slowly. No explanation, no accusation, just silence. And in that silence, I saw something I will never forget. Not guilt, not fear, but panic. The kind of panic people feel when a plan suddenly fails. Daniel tried to laugh. Ashley looked like she might faint. I dried my hands calmly and said only one sentence. "I'm not feeling well today. I think I'll stay home." That was it. No drama, no confrontation. Because in that moment, I made a decision that would change all of our lives. I decided I wasn't going to ask them what they were doing. I was going to find proof, real proof. And what I discovered later that afternoon, when I finally opened Daniel's locked desk drawer, was far worse than anything I could have imagined. Because inside that drawer wasn't just one packet. There were 12, in a printed document with a medical term I had never seen before. A term that would soon become the center of a criminal investigation. But at that moment, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was this: the two people I trusted most in the world weren't just betraying me. They were planning something irreversible, and I was already 3 months pregnant. What I didn't understand yet was why. On Labor Day weekend, exactly 92 days into my pregnancy, I sat on the bathroom floor, holding a plastic bag filled with 12 identical white packets I had just pulled from Daniel Pierce's locked desk drawer. Each packet had a printed pharmacy label and a tiny black expiration date stamped on the back. I counted them 3 times. 12, not 1, not 2, 12. That number alone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't a one-time impulse. It was a plan, a sustained, calculated plan. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. If you discovered proof that 2 people you loved were secretly trying to end your pregnancy, would you go straight to the police? Or would you first try to understand why they wanted it gone so badly? Because that why became the most terrifying part of this entire story. And if you've ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong but couldn't explain it, yet hit subscribe and stay with me, because the truth behind this will make your stomach drop. I forced myself to slow down. Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy people lose. I had learned that the hard way growing up with my mother, so I wiped my face, washed my hands, and laid the packets out on the bathroom tile in a straight line. Then I used my phone to photograph every single one. Front, back, close-ups of the labels. One label caught my attention immediately. Misoprostol. I had never heard of it, so I did what anyone would do. I Googled it. The search results loaded in less than 2 seconds. I wish they had taken longer, because the first line I read made my vision blur. Misoprostol is commonly used for medical abortion and to induce miscarriage. My hands went cold, not shaky, not trembling, just cold. Like all the warmth had drained out of my body at once. They weren't trying to make me feel better. They weren't trying to help nausea. They were trying to terminate my pregnancy without my knowledge. Quietly, gradually, and the dosage instructions I found online matched exactly what I had overheard Daniel whisper. Small doses, repeated exposure, early termination. That could be explained as a natural miscarriage. I remember staring at the screen and thinking one very clear sentence. They were planning to make it look like my body failed my baby. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me still. Because when something is that deliberate, emotion becomes useless. You switch into survival mode. I placed the packets back into a Ziploc bag and hid them in the bottom of my laundry basket, under folded towels. Then I cleaned Daniel's desk drawer so perfectly it looked untouched. When he came home that evening, he acted normal. Too normal. He kissed my cheek, asked how I felt, even offered to order takeout from the Thai place I liked. Ashley texted me around 7:12 p.m. Did the milk help today? Just that. No emoji. No extra words. That message confirmed something else I had already suspected. They were working together, coordinating, tracking whether I had consumed the doses. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was conspiracy, and conspiracies have motives. So I started thinking about the one question that mattered most. Why? Because here's the thing. Daniel had never wanted children. He had said that clearly from the beginning of our marriage, but he never said he would try to secretly eliminate one. That's a completely different level of cruelty. So something had changed recently, something big enough to make him take a risk like this. And then, like a light turning on, I remembered a conversation from 6 weeks earlier. It had seemed small at the time, almost boring. We had been sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing bills, when Daniel casually mentioned something. My Uncle Harold might leave me something in his will. Uncle Harold Pierce was a wealthy real estate investor in Scottsdale. He owned commercial properties worth millions, but he had always been estranged from Daniel's side of the family. I remember asking, why would he leave you anything? Daniel shrugged. He doesn't have kids, and he hates most of his siblings. I'm the only one who ever visited him. At the time, I thought nothing of it, until I remembered what he said next. One of the conditions is I can't have dependents yet. He's weird about inheritance getting split. At the time, I laughed because it sounded ridiculous. But now, sitting on the bathroom floor, with 12 abortion pills in my hand, that memory hit me like a freight train. What if this wasn't about not wanting a baby? What if this was about money? Real money. The kind that makes people do things they never thought they were capable of. That night, I pretended to sleep, while Daniel lay beside me, scrolling his phone. At 11:43 p.m., his screen lit up again. A message preview flashed. From Ashley. Did she drink it today? Daniel typed back immediately. Not yet. She poured it out this morning. I'll try again tomorrow. My heart stopped, because that meant one thing. They didn't know I knew, and that gave me an advantage. But it also meant something far more terrifying. They weren't going to stop. They were going to keep trying until they succeeded. I lay there in the dark, feeling my baby move faintly inside me. For the first time, a sensation so small, it might have been imagined, and I made a silent promise. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to warn them. I was going to let them believe their plan was still working. Because the only way to destroy a conspiracy is to let it fully reveal itself. What I didn't know yet was that the next piece of evidence would come from somewhere I never expected. And it would prove this wasn't just about inheritance money. It was about something far more personal. Something that had been happening right in front of me for months. Something that would explain why Ashley looked at Daniel the way she did. And why Daniel never stopped her from coming over every single day. 3 nights later, at exactly 2:17 a.m., I woke up to the faint vibration of Daniel Pierce's phone, buzzing against the wooden nightstand, lighting up the dark bedroom with a pale blue glow. I didn't move right away. I just watched, because after everything I had already discovered, I had learned something very important. People reveal their true selves most clearly when they believe no one is looking. Daniel shifted beside me, half asleep, reached blindly for his phone, and unlocked it with his thumb. The light illuminated his face, just long enough for me to see the tension in his jaw. Then he quietly slid out of bed and walked toward the living room. That alone told me the message wasn't innocent. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If your partner suddenly started taking secret late-night messages after you had already caught them hiding something dangerous, would you follow them? Or would you pretend to stay asleep? Because that decision changed everything for me. If you've ever trusted someone who turned out to be capable of far more than you imagined, stay with me. Because what I saw next shattered whatever denial I still had left. I waited exactly 10 seconds. Then I slipped out of bed silently and moved down the hallway. Our apartment was small, only 780 square feet, so every sound mattered. I stopped near the kitchen doorway and stayed in the shadow. Daniel was standing near the window, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. He was whispering, not texting, calling, and I immediately recognized the voice on the other end. Ashley Brooks, my younger sister. Even in a whisper, I knew her voice better than my own. "What do you mean?" she poured it out again. Ashley hissed through the phone speaker. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "She's been acting weird, quiet, watching me." My stomach tightened. Ashley's tone shifted from irritated to nervous. "Daniel, we don't have time for this. The lawyer said you have to sign the inheritance affidavit by October 1st. That's less than 3 weeks." My heart skipped. October 1st. A deadline. Daniel exhaled sharply. "I know, but if she doesn't miscarry before, then it complicates everything." Complicates. That word felt like a knife sliding slowly under my ribs. Ashley's next sentence made the world tilt. "Then you need to increase the dosage. You can't keep dragging this out." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Because this wasn't just agreement anymore. This was active participation, planning, pressure. Daniel lowered his voice even further. "I can't risk making her suspicious. If she goes to a doctor, they'll run tests." Ashley's reply came immediately. "Then make it look natural. Stress, hormones, something." And then after a pause that seemed to last forever, she said something that still echoes inside my head. "You promised this baby wouldn't exist before we start our life together." Our life together. Not your life. Not your future. I felt something inside me crack open in complete, silent clarity. Because in that moment, I finally understood something I had been refusing to see for months. This wasn't just about inheritance money. This wasn't just about avoiding a child. Daniel and Ashley weren't just conspiring. They were involved emotionally, romantically, maybe even physically. And suddenly, every strange moment from the past year rearranged itself into a horrifying pattern. The late-night resume help, the inside jokes I never understood, the way Ashley stopped dating anyone seriously after Daniel started driving her everywhere, the way Daniel defended her every time she borrowed money and never paid it back, and the way they both went quiet whenever I entered a room. The truth had been right in front of me. I just hadn't been ready to see it. Daniel spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "Once the inheritance clears, everything changes. We'll have enough to leave Arizona. Start over." Ashley whispered together. Together. That single word felt heavier than anything else, because it confirmed what I hadn't wanted to admit. They weren't just planning to remove my baby. They were planning to remove me from their future entirely. I stepped back into the hallway before Daniel ended the call. My legs felt steady. My breathing stayed calm. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. What remained was something colder, something sharper. Clarity. When Daniel came back into the bedroom a few minutes later, I pretended to be asleep. He slid under the covers carefully. But I noticed something new. He didn't touch me, not even accidentally. Like I had already become something fragile, something temporary, something that wouldn't be there much longer. The next morning, Ashley arrived again at exactly 8:05 a.m., carrying a bag of groceries she claimed were pregnancy-friendly snacks. She smiled too brightly, avoided my eyes, and when she hugged me, her arms felt stiff, not affectionate, performative. That hug lasted exactly 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I noticed something that made my stomach drop even further. Ashley was wearing a thin, gold chain necklace. A necklace I recognized immediately, because I had bought that exact one for Daniel 2 Christmases ago. He had stopped wearing it months earlier, said he lost it, but there it was, resting against Ashley's collarbone, my gift, on her body. That moment confirmed what I already knew deep down. Their betrayal wasn't new. It had been building for a long time. I smiled at her calmly, said nothing, because by then I understood something they didn't. They thought I was the weakest person in this situation, the one with the least power, the one they could quietly erase. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed I would react emotionally. They assumed I would confront them. They assumed I would break. Instead, I was doing something far more dangerous. I was watching, listening, collecting, and what I didn't know yet was that within the next week, I would uncover the final piece of evidence that would transform this from betrayal into something much bigger, something criminal. Because hidden inside Daniel's laptop, buried under encrypted folders, was a document that would reveal the exact amount of money he stood to gain if my baby disappeared before October 1st. And that number was far larger than anything I had imagined. On September 18th, exactly 13 days before Daniel Pierce's October 1st inheritance deadline, I sat in my car outside a public library parking lot, holding a flash drive that contained a document showing a number so large it didn't feel real. $840,000. That was the exact amount Daniel would receive from his Uncle Harold Pierce's estate, but only if he signed a sworn affidavit stating he had no legal dependents, biological or otherwise, at the time of inheritance disbursement. Not no children, no dependents, which meant one thing: my unborn baby counted. And if that baby existed on paper by October 1st, the inheritance would legally require restructuring into a trust that Daniel wouldn't fully control. Before I tell you how I got that document, let me ask you something. If you discovered someone was willing to risk a prison sentence just to avoid sharing money with their own child, would you believe they were capable of stopping at anything? Because the more I learned, the clearer it became. Daniel and Ashley weren't just desperate. They were running out of time, and desperate people make reckless mistakes. If you've ever watched someone slowly reveal their true nature under pressure, stay with me, because this is where everything began, escalating faster than I expected. I found the document 3 days earlier. It happened by accident. Daniel had left his laptop at home when he rushed to work early one morning. That alone was unusual. He guarded that laptop obsessively. He even kept it password locked and fingerprint enabled. But he had made one mistake. He had once set my fingerprint as a backup unlock method 2 years earlier when we shared finances. He never removed it, so when I placed my finger on the sensor, it opened instantly. That moment felt surreal, like stepping through a door that should have been permanently sealed. I didn't rush. I didn't click randomly. I opened the File Explorer and saw something that made my pulse quicken. A hidden folder labeled Property Docs. Inside were dozens of PDFs. Most were legitimate-looking tax statements, property maps, legal correspondence. But one file stood out. affidavit_no_dependents_final.pl. The word final told me everything. This wasn't hypothetical. This was already prepared. When I opened it, my hands stayed steady, because by then I had stopped expecting anything good. The document was dated August 27th, just 5 days after I told Daniel I was pregnant. It stated clearly, I, Daniel Michael Pierce, affirm under penalty of perjury that I have no biological or legal dependents currently living or expected. That single word made my throat tighten, because it meant he wasn't just hiding my pregnancy. He was legally denying the existence of his unborn child and signing that while actively trying to induce a miscarriage wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud, possibly multiple felonies. I kept reading. There was an attached letter from the estate attorney, and that letter revealed the real reason behind Daniel's urgency. Any dependent, born or confirmed prior to October 1st, will trigger mandatory restructuring into a multi-party trust with court-appointed oversight. In simple terms, if my baby existed legally by October 1st, Daniel would lose full control over the inheritance. He wouldn't be able to withdraw large amounts freely. He couldn't sell properties without court approval, and he couldn't funnel money wherever he wanted, including to Ashley. That was when everything clicked into place. This wasn't just about greed. It was about control. Daniel didn't want to share power, not with a child, not with me, and definitely not with a court. I copied the files onto a flash drive immediately. Then I closed everything carefully and locked the laptop exactly as I had found it. That flash drive sat in my purse for 3 days. I didn't look at it again until this morning, because seeing it once had been enough to understand the situation completely. Now sitting in my car outside the library, I stared at the number again. $2.84 million. That kind of money can change a life, or destroy one, or reveal who someone truly is. And Daniel had chosen his side. What I didn't expect was how quickly things would start getting worse. Because when I got home that afternoon, Ashley was already there, and she was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her hands were shaking slightly, not dramatically, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. When she saw me, she forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Natalie," she said softly, "can we talk?" That was the first time she had asked to speak privately since this entire nightmare began. My instincts immediately sharpened, because people only initiate conversations like that for 2 reasons. They're either about to confess something, or they're about to manipulate you. I sat across from her calmly. She took a deep breath, then said something that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. "You've seemed really stressed lately. I think maybe the pregnancy is too much for you." Her words were gentle, carefully chosen, but underneath them, I heard the real message. She was laying groundwork, creating a narrative, one where my mental state could be questioned, one where a miscarriage could be explained by stress. That realization sent a chill through me, because it meant their plan had expanded. They weren't just trying to cause a miscarriage anymore. They were preparing a story to explain it. And then Ashley said something even more unsettling. "You know, sometimes it's better when life makes difficult choices for us." That sentence hung in the air like poison. And for the first time since this began, I saw something in her eyes that terrified me. Not guilt, not hesitation, but resolve, the kind that comes from believing what you're doing is justified. That was when I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. Ashley didn't see herself as helping Daniel. She saw herself as protecting their future together, and that meant she wasn't going to back down. Not even if I confronted her, not even if I begged, not even if she knew I had proof. Because in her mind, I was already an obstacle, and obstacles are removed, not negotiated with. I smiled gently at her, said nothing revealing, because by then I understood something critical. The more desperate they became, the more dangerous they would get. And they were running out of time. What I didn't know yet was that within the next 48 hours, they would take a step that crossed a line neither of them could ever come back from. A step that would transform this from a secret conspiracy into an active, undeniable crime. And I would capture it on camera. 2 days later, on the evening of September 20th, exactly 11 days before Daniel Pierce's inheritance deadline, I installed a $89.99 motion-activated nanny camera inside a ceramic candle holder on our kitchen counter. It looked like a simple, beige, decorative jar from Target. No wires visible, no blinking lights, just a tiny lens hidden behind a pinhole, smaller than a grain of rice. I positioned it so it faced directly toward the area where Daniel usually prepared drinks, because by then I knew something for certain. They weren't going to stop trying. They couldn't afford to. Before I tell you what that camera captured, let me ask you something. If you knew someone was actively trying to harm you, would you warn them that you knew? Or would you let them walk straight into evidence they couldn't deny? Because what happened over the next 48 hours became the turning point that changed everything. If you've ever watched someone trap themselves with their own actions, stay with me, because this is where their plan began collapsing. I didn't tell anyone about the camera. Not a friend, not a coworker, not even my doctor, because silence was my biggest advantage. That night, I deliberately acted normal. I ate dinner with Daniel. I laughed when he made a joke about work. I even pretended to complain about nausea. Again, something I knew would encourage him to help. And sure enough, the opportunity came faster than expected. At 9:12 p.m., Daniel stood up casually. "I'll get you some warm milk. It might settle your stomach." My heart pounded once hard, but my face stayed calm. "Okay," I said softly. I remained on the couch pretending to scroll on my phone while secretly opening the live camera feed app. The image appeared instantly. Clear, centered. Daniel moved into frame. He opened the cabinet, took out a glass. Then, just like before, he reached into his pocket. This time, I watched every detail in real time. The white packet, the careful tearing, the powder dissolving slowly as he stirred. His face wasn't conflicted. It wasn't guilty. It was focused, like someone completing a routine task. And then something else happened that made my stomach drop even further. He paused and looked toward the hallway. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a message. A few seconds later, my own phone vibrated. A text from Ashley. "Is he doing it now?" My hands went ice cold, because that meant she wasn't just involved. She was actively monitoring the timing. Daniel replied from the kitchen. "Yes, she'll drink it this time." Ashley's response came immediately. "Good. We can't risk another week." Another week. That phrase told me something critical. They had a timeline, a countdown, and they were getting more desperate. Daniel carried the glass toward the living room. I quickly closed the camera app and pretended to look up. He handed me the milk with a reassuring smile. I took it, held it, felt its warmth through the glass. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. If I had never discovered the packets, if I had trusted him completely, I would have drunk it without hesitation, without suspicion. I would have unknowingly swallowed something designed to end my pregnancy. That thought alone almost broke my composure. But I stayed still, stayed quiet, because this wasn't the moment to react. This was the moment to secure undeniable proof. So I raised the glass slightly, paused, then deliberately said, "It's still too hot. I'll let it cool." Daniel nodded, masking impatience. "Take your time." He sat beside me, pretending to watch TV. But I could feel his eyes flicking toward the glass every few seconds. Watching, waiting, tracking, exactly like Ashley had asked him to. I waited 5 full minutes. Then I stood up calmly. "I'm going to take this to the bedroom," I said. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. That hesitation told me everything. He wanted to make sure I drank it. But he couldn't force me, so he nodded. "Okay." I walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and immediately poured the milk into a sealed container I had prepared earlier. Then I labeled it with a date and time. 9/20, 9:18 p.m. Evidence? Because by then, I wasn't just thinking emotionally. I was thinking legally. Chain of custody. Documentation. Proof that would stand up in court. When I returned to the living room, without the glass, Daniel looked relieved. Too relieved. He didn't ask whether I drank it. He didn't need to. He assumed success. That assumption would soon become his biggest mistake. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I reviewed the camera footage again. Frame by frame, every movement, every detail. It was all there. The packet, the pouring, the stirring, his face. Clear, undeniable. But what I didn't expect was something that happened the very next morning. Something that proved their desperation had reached a new level. Because when I checked my phone at 7:42 a.m., I saw a notification that made my heart slam against my ribs. Ashley had just scheduled a medical appointment for me at an obstetrics clinic without my knowledge, and the appointment note read one chilling sentence: consultation regarding pregnancy termination options. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. They weren't just trying to cause a miscarriage anymore. They were preparing a backup plan, a legal one that could erase my baby permanently, with my signature forged or manipulated. And they had already started the process. On September 23rd, exactly 8 days before Daniel Pierce's inheritance deadline, I walked into Desert Bloom Women's Health Clinic, holding a printed appointment confirmation that I never scheduled. The check-in time was 10:40 a.m. Under reason for visit, it clearly stated, termination consultation, patient request, not inquiry, not discussion, patient request. That wording alone made my stomach twist, because it meant someone had told the clinic I personally wanted to end my pregnancy. Before I tell you what happened inside that office, let me ask you something. If you discovered someone had already started medical paperwork pretending to be you, how far would you believe they were willing to go? Because by that point, one thing had become painfully clear. Daniel and Ashley weren't just planning anymore. They were executing, and they were running out of time. If you've ever seen how quickly desperation can push people into irreversible decisions, stay with me, because this was the moment their plan crossed into something undeniably criminal. I didn't confront the receptionist when I checked in. I didn't say the appointment was fake. I didn't say someone had scheduled it without my consent, because I had realized something important. This appointment could become evidence. So I signed in calmly, used my real ID, answered questions neutrally. The nurse called my name at exactly 10:57 a.m. Natalie Brooks. I stood heart steady and followed her down the hallway. The exam room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Clinical, cold. The nurse reviewed my chart on a tablet. Looks like you're around 13 weeks, correct? I nodded. Then she said something that made my pulse slow in a very dangerous way. We received your online intake form yesterday, confirming you wanted to proceed. Yesterday, I hadn't filled out any forms, which meant someone else had. The nurse continued casually. You also indicated concerns about financial instability and lack of partner support. My throat tightened, because that wasn't just false. It was specific, detailed. Someone had written a narrative designed to make it seem like I chose this. I forced my voice to remain calm. Can you show me the intake form? The nurse hesitated briefly, but turned the tablet toward me. And when I saw the signature at the bottom, my entire body went cold. It was my name, Natalie Brooks, but it wasn't my handwriting. It was Ashley's. I knew instantly, because I had seen her handwriting my entire life birthday cards, notes, grocery lists. She had forged it, not even carefully, confidently, like she believed she would never be questioned. The nurse misread my silence as emotional distress. She softened her tone. You don't have to decide anything today. This is just a consultation. I nodded slowly. Then I asked the most important question. Who submitted this form? The nurse checked the record. It was completed online through our patient portal. The account was created using your personal information. My personal information, which Ashley had easy access to. She had helped me fill out medical forms for years. She knew my birth date, my social security, last 4 digits, everything. And that meant something terrifying. She had impersonated me, digitally, in a medical system. That wasn't just betrayal. That was identity fraud, medical fraud, possibly multiple felony charges. I stayed calm, because the last thing I needed was to alert the clinic that something was wrong before I documented it. So I did something they didn't expect. I allowed the consultation to continue. The Dr. Melissa Carter entered at 11:14 a.m. She was professional, kind, completely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. She explained procedures, timelines, legal consent requirements. Then she said something that made my breath catch. If you choose to proceed, we would need your physical signature in person. No one else can authorize this. That single sentence felt like oxygen returning to my lungs because it confirmed something crucial. Ashley couldn't complete this process without me physically present. She could start it, but she couldn't finish it. That meant their backup plan had a limit, and limits create opportunities. When the consultation ended, I requested printed copies of all intake records for my personal review. The clinic provided them without hesitation. As I walked out of the building holding those documents, my hands finally started to tremble slightly. Not from fear, from realization, because now I had something beyond suspicion. I had proof of a coordinated effort to secretly administer abortive medication, forge medical consent, impersonate me, to initiate termination procedures, and all of it connected to a financial deadline. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a legal case, a serious one. But what I didn't realize yet was how close they were to taking one final, desperate step. Because when I got back to my car and turned on my phone, I saw 3 missed calls from Daniel and 1 voicemail. His voice sounded tight, controlled, but underneath it, I heard something new. Panic. Natalie, where are you? Ashley said you had a doctor's appointment today. You should have told me. Call me back, Ashley said. That meant she knew I had gone to the clinic, which meant one of 2 things. Either she had called to confirm the appointment, or she was expecting something to happen there, something she thought I had agreed to. My heart started pounding, because for the first time, I realized something terrifying. They might believe their plan had already succeeded. And if they believed that, they might start acting like the future they wanted was already secure. What I didn't know yet was that within the next 24 hours, their confidence would lead them to make the single biggest mistake of this entire nightmare. A mistake that would give me the final piece of evidence I needed. Because that night, they were going to meet somewhere they thought was completely private. And they were going to talk openly about everything, not knowing someone else would be listening. On the night of September 24th, exactly 7 days before Daniel Pierce's inheritance deadline, I sat alone in my parked car across the street from a dimly lit restaurant patio, wearing a wireless earpiece connected to a recorder that was capturing every word my husband and sister were about to say. The time was 8:36 p.m., and they had no idea I was there. No idea they were being recorded. No idea their entire plan was about to expose itself in their own voices. Before I tell you what they said, let me ask you something. If the 2 people who betrayed you believed they had already won, would you stop them immediately? Or would you let them keep talking long enough to destroy themselves completely? Because that night, I didn't interrupt. I didn't confront. I didn't even move. I listened. And what I heard changed everything. If you've ever seen what happens when people get careless the moment they think they're safe, stay with me, because this was the moment their masks fully slipped. Earlier that afternoon, something unusual happened. Daniel left work early 3 hours before his shift normally ended. I only knew because I had quietly enabled location sharing on his phone weeks earlier, back when I first suspected something was wrong. He didn't come home. Instead, he drove to a small Italian restaurant in Tempe called Belloro's, a place we had never gone together, a place far enough from our neighborhood that he probably assumed no one would recognize him. Then, 20 minutes later, Ashley's location pinged at the same address. That alone told me this meeting wasn't casual. They weren't at the apartment. They weren't texting. They chose a neutral location. Private, deliberate, which meant one thing. They were about to discuss something important. So I drove there, parked across the street, and used the small audio transmitter I had hidden inside Daniel's car earlier that morning. I never thought I'd become someone who did things like that. But betrayal changes people. It forces you into survival mode. And survival mode doesn't care about who you used to be. At 8:42 p.m., the first clear words came through the recorder. Ashley's voice, tense, impatient. Did she sign anything at the clinic? My heart thudded once. Hard. Daniel exhaled sharply. No, she went, but she didn't sign. She's stalling. Ashley cursed under her breath. We don't have time for this, Daniel. The affidavit signing is in 7 days. 7 days. Hearing the countdown out loud made the urgency feel even more real. Daniel's tone shifted, frustrated, strained. I know. I'm handling it. Ashley's voice softened slightly. You said the pills would work by now. There was a pause. Then Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. They would have, if she hadn't started throwing them away. That sentence confirmed something terrifying. He knew. Not that I knew the full truth, but he knew I wasn't consuming the doses, which meant he was already adapting his plan. Ashley's next question came fast. So what's the backup? Backup. My stomach tightened. Daniel hesitated before answering, then said quietly, if she doesn't miscarry before October 1st, we'll need to push for a legal termination. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. Because I had just been at that clinic, I knew exactly what that meant. Ashley's voice sharpened. She won't agree to it voluntarily. Daniel replied without hesitation. Then we make it look like a medical emergency. The world seemed to go silent around me. Because that wasn't manipulation anymore. That was something far darker. Ashley lowered her voice. What do you mean? Daniel's answer came slowly. Calculated? There are ways to induce complications. Severe enough that doctors would recommend immediate intervention. My breath stopped because I understood instantly. He wasn't talking about paperwork anymore. He was talking about physically putting me in danger. Ashley whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. That could hurt her. Daniel's response came cold. She'll recover. People recover from complications all the time. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Not because of the words, but because of the complete absence of hesitation. No guilt, no remorse, just calculation. Ashley fell silent for a moment, then said something that made everything even more horrifying. Once the inheritance clears, we can finally tell people the truth. Daniel asked quietly, about us. Ashley answered, voice steady. Yes, about us, about us. Hearing those words, spoken so plainly, felt like a knife, twisting slowly. Because now, there was no doubt left. They weren't just emotionally entangled. They were planning a future together. A future that didn't include me, and didn't include my child. Then Ashley added something that revealed just how long this betrayal had been unfolding. You should have left her last year when we first talked about this. Last year. My vision blurred for a second, because that meant their relationship, whatever form it had taken, had started long before my pregnancy, possibly long before I even suspected anything. Daniel sighed. I couldn't. Not until the inheritance situation was clear. Not until that phrase told me everything. He had stayed married to me, not out of love, not out of loyalty, but because I was strategically convenient, a placeholder, a temporary obstacle he intended to remove when the timing was right. At 9:03 p.m., their conversation shifted to logistics, dates, legal steps, financial planning, everything spoken calmly, like they were discussing a business deal. Not a human life, not a family. When the recording finally ended, my hands were shaking for the first time since this nightmare began. Not from fear, from clarity, because I now had undeniable proof of 3 things. They had conspired to secretly administer abortive drugs. They had forged medical documents. And they had discussed inducing physical harm to force termination. That wasn't just betrayal. That was a criminal conspiracy. And it changed the entire game. Because from that moment forward, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was building a case What I didn't realize yet was that the next step I was about to take would put me in a position they never expected. Because within the next 72 hours, I would do something that would make Daniel believe he had finally succeeded. Something that would give me the time and leverage I needed to prepare for the moment he feared most. Public exposure, and that moment was coming sooner than he thought. On September 27th, exactly 4 days before Daniel Pierce's inheritance deadline, I walked into our apartment at 6:18 p.m., pale-faced, silent, and holding a folded hospital discharge paper I had deliberately requested for a condition I didn't actually have. The word bleeding was visible in bold letters across the top. I didn't say a single word when Daniel looked up from the couch. I simply handed him the paper and sat down slowly like someone too exhausted to stand. Because that evening, for the first time since this nightmare began, I was about to do something dangerous. I was going to let him believe he had won. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If you knew someone was planning to destroy you, would you ever consider pretending to break first? Because sometimes the most powerful move in a war isn't attacking. It's making the other side think the battle is already over. If you've ever watched someone drop their guard the moment they believe they're safe, stay with me, because this was the moment Daniel and Ashley made the biggest mistake of all. Earlier that day, I had gone to an urgent care clinic, not because something was wrong with my pregnancy, but because I needed documentation, real official documentation that looked believable. I had told the doctor I experienced minor spotting something that can happen normally during pregnancy. It wasn't a lie, severe enough to trigger mandatory reporting, but it was enough for them to print a standard observation summary. Patient reports, vaginal bleeding, advised rest and monitoring. Those words alone could imply something much worse to someone already expecting a miscarriage. And that was exactly what I needed. Because I had realized something critical after listening to Daniel and Ashley's recorded conversation. They were operating under one assumption. That time was their enemy, which meant if they believed the pregnancy had already failed, they would relax. They would stop being careful. They would start planning openly. And careless planning creates the best evidence. Daniel read the paper slowly. His eyes moved across the page twice. I watched his face closely, and what I saw confirmed everything I already knew. Not grief, not concern, relief. Raw, unmistakable relief. He tried to hide it quickly, forced his expression into something softer. "Oh my God, Natalie, are you okay?" The performance almost would have convinced me once. But now, I could see every crack, every delayed reaction, every calculated tone shift. I nodded weakly. "I don't know yet. They said I need to rest and come back for follow-up." His shoulders lowered slightly, a subtle physical release of tension. The kind that happens when someone realizes a problem might solve itself. He sat beside me, placed his hand on my back, but the touch felt hollow, like contact without connection. Then he asked the question that revealed everything. "Did they say if the pregnancy is still viable? Not our baby. Not how are you feeling. Viable, a clinical word. Detached, cold." I shook my head slowly. "They said it's uncertain." That single word changed everything in his posture. Uncertain, not safe, not stable, but uncertain, which meant in his mind there was still hope the problem would resolve without further effort. He nodded slowly. We'll get through this." But his voice lacked weight, lacked sincerity, because he wasn't thinking about loss. He was thinking about outcomes. That night, something shifted dramatically. For the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't try to give me any drinks. He didn't push food. He didn't hover. Instead, he stayed unusually calm, even quiet. And at 9:31 p.m., his phone buzzed. He didn't leave the room to answer. He simply turned the screen slightly away from me. But I still saw the name, Ashley. He typed quickly. Then his phone vibrated again, almost instantly. I didn't need to see the message, because I already knew what it said. But later that night, After he fell asleep, I checked the synced message backup I had access to. And when I read their conversation, I felt a strange, cold calm settle inside me. Ashley, did something happen? Daniel, she's bleeding. Doctor says it might not be viable. Ashley, so it's working. Daniel looks like it. Ashley, thank God. Thank God. Those two words sat on the screen like poison because they weren't celebrating survival. They were celebrating the possible death of my child. And then Ashley sent another message that revealed just how confident they had become. Once it's confirmed, we can finally move forward. Move forward. That phrase told me something crucial. They weren't just waiting anymore. They were preparing for a future where they believed I would no longer stand in their way. And that meant they would soon start discussing things more openly, more recklessly. Financial transfers, living arrangements, legal steps, all the things they had previously hidden. Exactly what I needed. Over the next 2 days, I played my role carefully. I moved slowly, spoke softly, pretended fatigue, let Daniel believe I was emotionally fragile. Because people reveal their true intentions most clearly when they think someone is too weak to resist. And Daniel believed that completely. He stopped being cautious, stopped deleting messages quickly, stopped blocking certain documents, because in his mind, the biggest obstacle was already disappearing. What he didn't realize was this. I had already contacted a lawyer, a criminal attorney specializing in fraud and domestic harm cases. And within 48 hours, we would begin preparing something Daniel had never considered possible. Not a private confrontation, not a quiet separation, but a public exposure so complete that every lie he had built would collapse in a single moment. Because the inheritance affidavit signing ceremony on October 1st wasn't going to go the way he expected, not even close. And he had no idea I was already planning to be there. On September 29th, exactly 2 days before Daniel Pierce was scheduled to sign his inheritance affidavit, I sat inside a quiet law office in downtown Phoenix at 2:03 p.m., watching a criminal attorney place my evidence into neatly labeled folders, marked with words that made everything feel suddenly terrifyingly real. Felony fraud, attempted assault, conspiracy. Each label was printed in bold, black ink, and each one had Daniel's name typed beneath it. Before I tell you what we prepared that day, let me ask you something. If you finally had the power to expose someone who tried to destroy you, would you do it privately? Or would you make sure they faced consequences in front of everyone they were trying to impress? Because by then, I understood something clearly. Daniel wasn't afraid of losing me. He wasn't afraid of losing our marriage. He was afraid of losing money. And the only way to truly break someone like that is to expose them at the exact moment they believe they're about to win. If you've ever seen someone's world collapse in real time because of their own actions, stay with me, because this was where the final plan came together. The attorney's name was Rachel Mendoza, 38 years old. Calm voice, sharp eyes, the kind of person who didn't react emotionally. She processed information like a machine, which was exactly what I needed. I had brought everything: the nanny camera footage of Daniel pouring the powder into my drink, the recorded conversation from the restaurant, the forged medical intake forms, screenshots of Ashley's messages, and the copied inheritance affidavit. Rachel reviewed each piece slowly, methodically. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react dramatically. She just took notes. After nearly 40 minutes of silence, she finally looked up and said something that made my chest tighten. Natalie, what they've done isn't just morally wrong. It's criminal in multiple ways. Her tone was precise, measured. There's clear evidence of conspiracy to administer medication without consent. That alone can qualify as felony assault in Arizona. She tapped the folder labeled misoprostol evidence. Forgery of medical consent forms is another felony. Then she tapped the inheritance affidavit. And signing this document, while knowingly concealing a dependent, could constitute inheritance fraud. Hearing those words out loud made everything feel heavier, more permanent, because until that moment, part of my mind still saw this as personal betrayal. But legally, it was much bigger. Rachel continued, "The key question now is, how do you want to proceed?" I swallowed slowly. "What options do I have?" She outlined them clearly. Option 1, file immediately with law enforcement and initiate a criminal investigation. Option 2, pursue civil protective orders first, then build a criminal case. Option 3, she paused slightly before saying this, expose the fraud publicly at the signing ceremony before law enforcement intervenes. That option made my heart beat faster because it aligned exactly with what I had already been considering. Rachel explained further, if he signs the affidavit under oath, denying dependence, while we have evidence of his knowledge and actions, that becomes an additional charge. Perjury. The word hung in the air. She leaned forward slightly. It also ensures witnesses, lawyers, estate representatives, possibly family members, all present. A public collapse, not just legal consequences, social consequences, reputation destroyed instantly. And for someone like Daniel, someone obsessed with image and control, that would hit hardest. I took a slow breath. That's what I want. Rachel studied my face carefully. You understand, this will escalate everything immediately. Once exposed, there's no quiet resolution. I nodded, because by then, I had passed the point of wanting quiet. I wanted finality, clarity, safety, and accountability. Rachel began outlining the plan. We would not confront Daniel beforehand. We would allow him to proceed to the signing ceremony. We would notify law enforcement in advance, discreetly, so officers could be present nearby. And at the exact moment he signed the affidavit, Rachel would intervene, present the evidence, formally challenge the statement, and trigger an immediate legal halt. The timing had to be precise, because once signed under oath, the legal impact would be significantly stronger. As Rachel explained the logistics, I felt something unexpected inside me. Not rage, not fear, relief. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was in control. But there was one final question Rachel needed answered. Is your pregnancy medically confirmed and documented? I nodded. I have full records. She gave a small, approving nod. Good. That ensures there's no ambiguity about dependent status. Then she added something that made my throat tighten slightly. And Natalie, your child has legal protections. What they attempted isn't just harm against you. It involves endangerment of a viable pregnancy. Hearing that phrasing made everything feel real in a way nothing else had. Because until then, I had been focused on survival, on evidence, on strategy. But in that moment, I felt something deeper, a quiet, steady determination. Not just to protect myself, but to protect the life growing inside me. Before I left the office, Rachel handed me one final document. A formal notice prepared, but not yet filed. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Intent to initiate criminal proceedings." Below that, Daniel Pierce's full name, Ashley Brooks's full name. Seeing both names printed together like that felt surreal, because they had chosen to stand together against me, and now they would face consequences together. As I walked out of the building at 4:27 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. The signing is confirmed for Friday morning. After that, everything changes. Everything changes. He had no idea how true that statement really was, because what he didn't know yet was that on October 1st, at exactly 10:00 a.m. in a conference room full of lawyers and witnesses, he was going to sign his own downfall. And Ashley was going to be sitting right beside him when it happened. On October 1st, at exactly 9:58 a.m., I walked into a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of Pierce and Halbrook Estate Law, holding a slim black folder that contained every piece of evidence my husband had spent months trying to hide. There were 9 people already seated inside: 2 estate attorneys, 1 financial trustee, 3 extended Pierce family members, Ashley Brooks, and Daniel Pierce, sitting at the head of the table with a pen in his hand, seconds away from signing the affidavit that would give him full control of $2.84 million. He didn't see me at first. No one did, because I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I simply stepped inside quietly and closed the door behind me. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If someone tried to erase your life, piece by piece, would you choose revenge in private? Or would you make sure the truth arrived at the exact moment they believed they had already won? Because what happened in that room wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, precise, and completely irreversible. If you've ever watched someone's entire future collapse in a single sentence, stay with me, because this was the moment Daniel's world shattered. The room fell silent the instant the door clicked shut. Daniel looked up first, and the moment his eyes landed on me, the color drained from his face. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Ashley turned next. Her expression froze mid-breath. Shock. Pure, unfiltered shock. Because they both believed something very specific at that moment. They believed I was at home, fragile, possibly miscarrying, not standing in front of them, steady, composed, and very clearly not broken. One of the estate attorneys spoke first. "Ma'am, this is a private legal proceeding." I placed my folder on the table calmly. "I'm Natalie Brooks, Daniel Pierce's legal spouse." The word spouse landed heavily in the room because it immediately made my presence relevant. Legally relevant. Daniel's mouth opened slightly, closed again. No words came out. That was the first stage. Denial through silence. Rachel Mendoza stepped in right behind me, her voice calm, professional. "I am counsel, representing Mrs. Brooks. We are here to formally challenge the affidavit being presented today." The trustee frowned. "On what grounds?" Rachel opened her own folder. "On the grounds that Mr. Pierce's sworn statement claiming no dependents is materially false." The word false hung in the air like a bell strike. Daniel finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he said quickly, his tone too sharp, too defensive. "My wife is mistaken." There it was. Stage 2, immediate denial. Rachel didn't react emotionally. She simply slid a document across the table, a certified medical confirmation of my pregnancy. 12 weeks, documented, legally recognized. The trustee read it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Mr. Pierce, is this accurate?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ashley, then back at the trustee. "She's pregnant," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean," Rachel interrupted calmly. "It means the affidavit cannot legally state no expected dependents." Silence fell again. He tried to pivot immediately. Stage 3, deflection. "I wasn't aware the pregnancy was viable," he said quickly. "That's why." Rachel slid the next piece of evidence forward. The recorded messages, printed transcripts, time-stamped, highlighting one specific line. "Once it's confirmed, we can finally move forward." The trustee read silently, then looked up slowly. "Mr. Pierce, you were clearly aware." Daniel's breathing changed. "Faster now." Less controlled. Ashley spoke suddenly, her voice tight. "This is a misunderstanding. Natalie has been unstable." That was stage 4. Blame shifting. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She simply pressed a button on a small audio player. The room filled with Daniel's recorded voice. "If she doesn't miscarry before October 1st, we'll need to push for a legal termination." Every person in the room went completely still. Ashley's face turned pale. Daniel froze, because hearing your own voice say something you can't deny destroys every possible defense. The audio continued. "There are ways to induce complications," Ashley whispered faintly. That could hurt her. Daniel's recorded voice answered coldly. "She'll recover." Rachel stopped the recording. Silence fell so heavy, it felt physical. Daniel stared at the table, his hands trembling now. because he understood something fully for the first time. There was no way out, no explanation, no manipulation, only consequences. The trustee cleared his throat slowly. "Mr. Pierce, this proceeding is suspended immediately." That single sentence was the sound of his future collapsing. Ashley suddenly spoke again, but this time her voice shook. "This is being twisted." Rachel slid one final piece of evidence forward. The nanny cam photos. Clear images of Daniel pouring powder into my drink. Ashley saw them. Her entire body went rigid. That was the moment denial finally broke. Because there is no arguing with visual proof. Daniel's shoulders slumped. Completely. Like something inside him had snapped. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared at the table and whispered one sentence. I didn't think she'd find out. Not an apology. Not remorse. Just regret at being caught. That sentence alone told everyone in the room everything they needed to know. Within minutes, the estate attorneys announced the signing canceled, the affidavit voided, all inheritance proceedings suspended pending investigation. And as Rachel quietly stepped aside, 2 uniformed officers entered the room. Because what Daniel didn't know was that this wasn't just public exposure. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something legal, something permanent. And in the next few minutes, he was about to hear words he had never imagined would be directed at him. You are being detained pending investigation. On October 1st, at exactly 10:23 a.m., I stood silently beside the conference room wall while 2 police officers asked Daniel Pierce to place his hands behind his back. The metal handcuffs clicked shut with a sound so small, yet so final, it seemed to echo through the entire room. No one spoke, no one moved, because in that moment, the reality had fully landed. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It wasn't a messy marriage. It was a criminal investigation, and Daniel's world had just collapsed in real time. Before I tell you what happened in the minutes that followed, let me ask you something. If someone tried to erase your future piece by piece, would seeing them face consequences bring you satisfaction? Or would it feel strangely quiet, almost hollow? Because what I felt in that moment wasn't triumph. It was something far colder, closure. If you've ever reached the end of a long betrayal and realized the anger was already gone, stay with me, because this was where the final unraveling began. Daniel didn't resist the officers. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply looked stunned, like a man who had spent months believing he controlled everything, suddenly realizing he had lost all control at once. One officer spoke calmly. Mr. Pierce, you are being detained, pending investigation into allegations of conspiracy fraud and attempted unlawful administration of medication. Hearing those words spoken out loud changed the atmosphere instantly. Because legal language strips away emotion, it turns betrayal into facts, into charges, into consequences. Ashley's reaction came next, and it followed a predictable pattern. Stage 1, denial. This is insane, she said sharply, standing halfway from her chair. This is all a misunderstanding. Natalie is lying. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, because even as she spoke it, she knew the evidence said otherwise. The officer turned toward her calmly. Ma'am, please remain seated. Her eyes darted toward Daniel, searching, pleading, like she expected him to say something that would fix everything. But Daniel didn't look at her. He kept staring at the floor. Because by then, he had entered stage 2. Blame shifting, he spoke quietly. Ashley, you said it wouldn't go this far. The words hit her like a slap. Her face went pale. What she whispered. Daniel's voice rose slightly. You were the one who found the medication. You said it was safe. You said, there it was. The turning point. The moment conspirators stop protecting each other and start protecting themselves. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. Instantly. No, you told me to do it. You said we had no choice. The room fell completely silent. Because now, the truth wasn't being revealed by evidence. It was being revealed by them. Their own words. their own panic. The officer raised a hand slightly. "That's enough. Both of you can discuss this with counsel." But the damage was already done. Ashley sank back into her chair, shaking. "Stage 3, victim posture. This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered almost to herself. "We were just trying to fix things." Fix things. That phrase revealed something chilling. Because in her mind, none of this had been cruelty. It had been justified, necessary. The result of believing their future mattered more than anyone else's. Daniel finally lifted his head. For the first time since the handcuffs clicked, he looked at me. Really looked. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't hateful. It was empty. Like someone who had finally reached the end of all excuses. He spoke one sentence, barely above a whisper. "You could have just divorced me." I held his gaze calmly, then answered with the only truth that mattered. "You could have just let me live." That sentence hung in the air long after it was spoken, because it captured everything. The betrayal, the calculation, the line he had crossed. The officers led Daniel toward the door. Ashley remained seated, crying quietly now. But even her tears felt different. Not remorseful, not regretful, more like grief for the future she thought she had secured, now disappearing in front of her. As Daniel reached the doorway, he stopped briefly, not to look at me, not to speak, but because he realized something final. He wasn't leaving that room as a wealthy heir. He was leaving it as a suspect, a man whose actions had turned a $2.84 million inheritance into a criminal case. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the longest chapter of my life ended. The trustee cleared his throat quietly. "Mrs. Brooks, the estate proceedings will remain frozen pending investigation. Any dependent claims will now be reviewed by the court." I nodded, because the money no longer mattered. Not really. What mattered was safety, distance, and an end to the fear that had lived in my chest for months. Rachel touched my arm gently. "You did exactly what you needed to do." Her voice was steady, grounding. And for the first time since this began, I felt something unfamiliar. Stillness. But what I didn't fully understand yet was that the final stage of this story wasn't about courtrooms or charges. It was about something much quieter, something far more difficult than exposing betrayal, learning how to live again after it. And that part would begin in a place no one else was present to see. On a quiet Sunday morning in late April, exactly 6 months after the day Daniel Pierce was taken out of that conference room in handcuffs, I sat on a wooden bench in Desert Breeze Park, watching a stroller rock gently in front of me. Inside it, wrapped in a soft, pale yellow blanket, my daughter slept peacefully, her tiny hand curled around the edge of the fabric like she already understood how precious safety was. Her name is Lily Brooks. She was born at 38 weeks, weighing 6 pounds and 11 ounces, after a labor that lasted exactly 9 hours and 14 minutes. The nurses told me she had one of the strongest heartbeats they'd heard all week. And when I first held her, something inside me finally settled. Not healed completely, but settled. Before I tell you how everything ended for Daniel and Ashley, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that real justice doesn't feel loud or dramatic when it finally arrives? It feels quiet, like a long, steady exhale after holding your breath for far too long. If you've ever survived something that changed you permanently but didn't break, you stay with me, because this is where the story finally comes to rest. The legal process moves slower than anything I had ever experienced. Months of hearings, documentation, interviews. But the evidence we had collected was overwhelming. The recorded conversations, the forged medical forms, the camera footage, the text messages, every piece fit together like a puzzle that Daniel and Ashley themselves had built. In February, the final charges were formally filed. Daniel accepted a plea agreement to avoid trial. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit assault, fraudulent misrepresentation in estate documentation, and unlawful administration of medication. The judge sentenced him to 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory counseling, and permanent disqualification from controlling any portion of the Pierce estate. His inheritance didn't disappear entirely, but it was placed under court-managed trust oversight. And legally, a protected portion was allocated for Lily as a dependent beneficiary. A future he had tried so hard to prevent now existed permanently in legal records. Ashley's case followed separately because her actions, identity fraud and medical forgery, carried different charges. She also accepted a plea deal, 2 years probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record that would follow her into every future job application. The two of them stopped speaking long before the legal process ended. I learned that from Rachel months later. Because once consequences became real, their alliance collapsed, just like it always does when a partnership is built on betrayal. People often ask me one question when they hear what happened. Did I feel satisfaction? The honest answer is complicated. I didn't feel joy watching them face consequences. I didn't feel revenge. What I felt was something quieter, relief. Because the fear was gone, the constant tension, the second-guessing, the sense that my life could be quietly taken from me without warning. All of that ended the moment the truth came into the light. There's a sentence I wrote in my journal during those months that I still return to sometimes. Silence protects the guilty. Evidence protects the living. That became my anchor, my reminder that staying calm, staying patient, had saved not just me, but my child. 6 weeks after Lily was born, I moved into a small townhouse across town. 2 bedrooms, white walls, a tiny backyard with a single lemon tree. Nothing fancy, but completely mine. For the first time in years, every object inside my home existed because I chose it, not because someone else allowed it. There were no locked drawers, no hidden conversations, no tension in the air, just quiet. Sometimes at night, when Lily finally falls asleep, I sit near the window with a cup of tea and watch the streetlights glow. And in those moments, I think about something that took me a long time to understand. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's freedom. It's the ability to wake up without fear, to breathe without calculating danger, to build a future no one else controls. Daniel once believed money would give him power over everything, over me, over our child, over his own consequences. But in the end, the one thing he tried hardest to eliminate, Lily, became the permanent reminder of what he lost. And she will grow up knowing one simple truth. Her life was protected because her mother refused to stay silent. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them. And when you see danger clearly, don't confront it emotionally. Document it, because truth backed by evidence is stronger than any lie. As I sit here now, watching Lily stir slightly in her stroller, the breeze moves softly through the trees above us. The world feels calm, balanced, safe, and that is something no inheritance, no betrayal, no manipulation could ever buy. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever survived betrayal and found your way back to peace, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone else realize they're not alone. And if you want to hear another story about quiet strength and unexpected justice, stay with me, because sometimes the most powerful endings begin with someone finally choosing not to stay silent.